About a year ago, I set out with a couple of friends to finish 47 miles of the North Country Trail through the Allegheny National Forest. I had never been there before and didn't know much about the area. And much like reflected on in my video explaining the trip last year, I did fall in love with the trail because of its earthiness. There's not a lot of big views there, but you are close to the earth. It is a green, mossy place, and there's so much to enjoy, and you can get lost in just the beauty of the earth itself. It's not a high-traveled section. We barely ran into any people while we were out. This year we returned to do a 45-mile section, and it was a very similar experience, but I would say even a quieter experience. There were few of us traveling there, and we ran into even fewer people while we were hiking.
We started at Cherry Run Road off of 948 and headed south to the Amsler Creek trailhead on Salmon Creek Road. According to the FarOut app, we would hike 45.2 miles. But according to Strava and Gaia, we would log 50 miles hiking.
What I'd like to share with you after reflecting on this experience is reinforcing some of the safety measures to consider when you're out in somewhere that remote, and how we navigated each day on our day hikes, and the leapfrog approach we took to our vehicles because there were just two of us on this trip, so we had to get around. And then finally just a bit about the trail itself and why I find it so appealing. As I mentioned, the North Country Trail, as it navigates through the Allegheny National Forest, is an extremely remote location. There is very little cell service there. We did manage to catch some cell service in this section, but it was very spotty. For that reason, it's very important to have some type of satellite locator device like a Garmin InReach or any of the other options that are out there, particularly if you're traveling in a small group or by yourself. For that very same reason, because there is no cell service, it's very important that you download some type of offline map first. So if you're using something like FarOut, which does have the North Country Trail as an option, and I purchased the Pennsylvania-Ohio section of that, you can download that offline first before you head out. So when your satellite picks up your location, you have the map there already downloaded so that you know exactly where you are on the trail. Now, likewise, because we were doing this leapfrog with our car, and also just to figure out how to get out of there back home, we downloaded the Google map offline before we headed into the area. We made the mistake of not doing that ahead of time last year, and we did learn how to go through that process of downloading our routes in advance and the map area that we would be traveling in so that we could use that offline map to navigate. With regard to FarOut as a navigation tool, it worked wonderfully throughout the entire section hike, as last year it did as well. So no problems with that. Very high confidence level in that. The observation is that there were two changes that were made recently to the trail that weren't updated in FarOut. But the first one is the reroute I mentioned in that last video. If we had stayed on the trail that FarOut had indicated, which would be a road walk, we would have been perfectly fine. We would have gotten where we needed to go. The updated trail that takes you through the woods is a much more lovely option, and it was well marked, so we had no problem, and it wasn't a long part of the trail that diverged from where FarOut had us. It all worked out wonderfully. The only other thing that was not updated is a new shelter, which is hardly a problem and a nice surprise to run into, but that was the big boulders shelter that I stopped in at the last section of our hike, the last day. And honestly, I didn't even notice that it wasn't on FarOut until I went back and tried to confirm the name of the shelter, and the only way I was able to get it was on my video and going in and zeroing in on the shelter name that I was able to capture in the video. So I had no idea there was a shelter there. I wasn't expecting it, but it was the end of our hike and I was just, heading home at that point. Now, of course, if you are relying on your cell phone for all of these things, it's very important to keep those charged. So bringing an extra battery charge with you on these trips is something to consider. It's very easy to forget to put your cell phone in airplane mode and burn through that battery. Or if you do get lost, heaven forbid, it could happen. But you could use that battery by being out in the trail longer than expected, and using it will drain the battery. And if you're like me, you take a lot of video, you go through your batteries very quickly. Those recommendations apply whether you're doing day hikes or backpacking. One thing I would add, if you do plan to do an extended section hike through the North Country Trail in Allegheny National Forest, is know that there's no resupply options. You're in the middle of nowhere. I've thought about this, and I'd be interested in any locals commenting on this, but I think what I would do is somewhere in the middle of my section hike, I would leave a hard-sided bear canister and maybe reinforce with some odorless bags, and put a resupply in there and hide it at some crossroad where I knew I would be heading, so that I did have some resupply options, because there's just nothing. The other thing that you could do is leave it in your car. If you put your car at a midpoint, then you could hide your food in there. I don't think the bears in this area are like the ones in the Smoky Mountains, where they associate cars with food. They knock out the windows and take whatever's in there. Still is something to be aware of, and consider odor proofing whatever containers you're using, whether you're hiding it in your car or in some type of canister that you hide. I want to talk a little bit about the trail experience this time. I am amazed by the trail maintenance that happens in this section. Well funded, volunteers are strong. We saw that in the shelters along the way. They are well maintained, so many of them new. And the tent sites are to be envied if you're someone who's used to hiking the Appalachian Trail. Really would recommend, and that's part of the reason I kind of wish that I were backpacking through this, and maybe someday I will get a chance to do that in the future, but really would recommend it as a backpacking option because of those conditions and the well-marked trails and the safety of the trails. Just a superb job that the maintenance people do there. One thing that struck me this time more than the last time we were out, I think I mentioned that some of the tent sites near the roads look like they might be used by weekenders. I think in the section that we were in, particularly near the Minister Creek area, the Minister Creek trailheads, there were tent sites that you could tell from some of the discussion. That was the one place we ran into people, that this is a high traffic area during high season. I wouldn't want to be tenting around that area. So just something to be aware of. What I loved about this hike was, again, the earthiness of it, the nature of it. There weren't quite as many boulders, like the big massive boulders, but there were a few, and they are fascinating. I love the trees clinging onto the sides of the rocks, and part of both experiences that I really enjoyed. This time, we ran into the fossils that you'll see in the last video. Is that the third video? I think that was the third video, where it was, brachioids, I think is what they're called. 300 to 500 million years ago, these things were everywhere. It's an indication that at one point, this Pennsylvania was under the ocean. So it's kind of a nice little time travel and education experience, and real life hands-on learning that you do. You walk away and do a little bit of research and come away with some information. Last year we found a fossil. It wasn't an animal fossil, but it was indication of the waves that had been at the bottom of a sea or lake that were captured on a rock. Just beautiful. Love those experiences.
Hunting mushrooms this time of year is very rewarding. They make for great photos, and the more I learn about identifying mushrooms, the more I'm tempted to harvest edible mushrooms. but honestly, I'm not a big mushroom eater.
We did not see a lot of animal life this time out. Always a little disappointing. I had my eye out for bear, deer, anything. You know, we saw squirrels, maybe a deer, but not a whole lot. But there's a lot of leaves, so you're making a lot of noise as you go through the woods. What we did run into this time again were some of those oil pumps that are around the drills. They're not being used, but we did notice that this was the smell of oil in a couple sections of the trail. It didn't last long, but it was kind of strong. So either some oil odor leaking, some gas leaking, or it was fracking going on not too far away that was causing some of that odor. Now, to talk about the route we took and how we did the leapfrog, and maybe a little bit look at last year's route, I'm going to hop back home so I can manipulate the technology.
Our southbound section hike of the North Country Trail, which covers miles 320 to 275, started at Cherry Run Road. To reduce the overall miles we would drive over 4 days of hiking, we dropped a car at Cherry Run Road and drove the second car south to start our first day of hiking from Disabled Hunters Road. From here we hiked north to retrieve the car we had left to start the day. We took this car to the cabin rental, and the second car remained parked at the trail overnight. The next day we headed south to North Country Trail parking at Forest Road 449. From there we hiked north again to Disabled Hunters Road, where we retrieved the second car to drive to the cabin rental. The first car would again stay overnight and become the destination for the end of our next day. We repeat this pattern until the final day of hiking, where we drive back to our starting point for the day to retrieve a car before heading to our respective homes. The alternative for day hiking would be to drop off and pick up each morning and evening. If you can leave a car overnight, you can significantly reduce the amount of time and fuel used on your trip. There is, however, a mindset shift in hiking north in order to go south. In total, we've hiked 91.7 miles of the Allegheny National Forest section of the North Country Trail. That's almost the entirety of this section. I have enjoyed being here this time of year with the trails largely to ourselves and the leaves turning. Back home we were experiencing a drought, so the bit of rain that we had here was more than welcome. The trail was ever-changing and there was always something interesting to explore and study. I will always have a smile on my face when I think about the North Country Trail in Allegheny National Forest. Thank you for joining me on the trail, and happy hiking.